Today I want to talk to you about a lens that I love. This is the 35mm f1.8 lens. And there's a reason I want to make a video just about this lens. If I was going to shoot a movie with just one lens, or shoot like a whole short film with just one lens, it would be this one. The 35mm full frame focal length and the f1.8 aperture is just a really sweet combo for a lot of different kinds of shooting, especially if you're shooting documentary style stuff on the street. Before I go any further, I do want to mention that this is not a sponsored video by Sony. This is not an ad for this lens. It's not this specific Sony lens that is awesome. It's just the focal length combined with the aperture, that magical combo of 35 f1.8 or 35 f2. Okay, so moving on. The first thing that I love about this lens is the size. It's pretty small. The second thing that I like about it is it's not so wide that it introduces any distortion into the image, because while it may be easier to get everything in the frame when you have a wide lens, sometimes it looks less cinematic to me. Once you go wider than about 28, let's say, or even wider than 35, you start to get a little bit of stretching between the foreground and the background. So what's in the foreground looks like it's closer, and what's in the background looks like it's further away. And if you like that look, then cool. But if you're going for more of like a neutral look that just looks normal, then you want to stay in a more normal range of lens, starting at about 35 and going up to maybe 65, something like that, before it starts to look a little bit compressed in telephoto. So this is the widest you can go, basically, before getting any distortion. Okay, now I'm going to talk about how I frame a human subject with the 35mm lens. So if you're starting to compose your shot, you may look at your subject and say, okay, well, I'm just going to film from here because, hey, it looks pretty nice. You know, I'm just going to film from an angle that's convenient for the camera operator. Well, guess what? The audience will know you're being lazy, because it is not the best angle for the subject's face, and it's not the best angle to show the background. So what I do is first, I lower myself to the eye level of the subject. So here I am now at eye level, and we can see the background much better. You get a much greater sense of the depth of the background behind her. So you compare that to this. This tells us more about where she is, and it makes the scene feel more 3D. We see more depth behind her. The second thing I do is I try to shoot either perfect profiles, like this from the side, or I make a decision to be more 3/4 front or all the way front view. I try to avoid what I call lazy side views. It just doesn't really highlight anything in the shot. If I shoot from a more perfect profile, the shot looks more carefully composed. And sometimes I'll even adjust to go maybe a little bit below eye level, something like that. So I put that bokeh line, those lights in the background, so I put them right at her eye level, because sometimes that looks good too. If I want to add a little bit of motion to this shot, I can start rocking my body like a human slider back and forth. I don't always have to use a piece of gear to do it. I can just use my body, as long as I keep it slow and subtle. So all I'm doing is kind of rocking my feet back and forth. And another way to add a bit of motion here is to intentionally shake the camera around a bit. And I'm just kind of shaking it at a medium pace. You have to get a feel for this yourself. But if I want it to feel a little bit more improvisational, then I can wiggle the camera. Then, if I want to get a second shot, a close-up, I can just kind of move toward her, staying basically at eye level, staying at either a perfect profile or a 3/4 front. In this case, I would lower myself so I can see her eyes. So I would go off eye level, just because she's looking down and I want to keep her eyes in the shot, because that looks stupid. So this is better. Now what if I want to go super close up with this lens? Well, you will get some distortion with the 35. You would get less distortion in a super close-up shot if you were using a 50, 85, you know, a longer focal length lens. So that means I have to kind of be clever about how I do my close-ups so that the distortion is not unflattering. If you picture the map of her face, I try to put the center of the lens pointed toward her cheekbone. Like, sort of like that. So the distortion is basically making one part of your face look bigger. That's what distortion does. So you want to choose a part of the face that is flattering to most people. And most people wouldn't mind if their cheekbones were a little more pronounced. They don't want their nose necessarily to look bigger. They might not want their chin to look bigger, but they're usually okay with it if their cheekbones look a little bigger. However, there is a way to cheat your 35mm lens to give you a longer focal length, which comes in handy for these close-up types of shots. And that's by using APS-C mode on a full-frame camera. In other words, you got a big sensor here, but some lenses are made for smaller sensors, and the camera has a mode that zooms in the image so that these smaller lenses for smaller sensors end up filling up the whole image, and you still get a 4K video shot. That's APS-C mode. If you don't have APS-C mode, you can crop the image in post. It gives you the same effect, but you lose some resolution. The simple way to think of it is your 35 f1.8 is now a 50 f2.8, and you can get your close-up shot with less distortion, which really comes in handy if you want to go super close. And that's another thing I love about this lens, is that it has a very, very close minimum focus distance, which lets you get almost macro shots. One more kind of cinematic shot that I just love doing with the 35mm lens is the back view medium close-up, which is what we have right here, where I cut the shot off in the middle of her back, and I leave a little bit of room above her head, and the camera is roughly at her eye level, maybe a little bit lower than eye level, looking straight out. And we're basically just seeing what she sees. And this kind of shot works really great for like cityscapes, or if you're on a gimbal, if somebody's walking, because it brings so much depth into the shot and allows us to imagine ourselves in the place of the person in the foreground, seeing what they see. And one cool thing you can do is racking focus to the background. So I have my touch screen enabled on this camera, which means if I touch the screen, it will focus wherever I touch. So I just touched on the background there. I'm going to touch on her, and it focused back to her. So you can get a cinematic focus pull just by touching on different parts of your screen, which works great for this type of shot. I generally don't like to shoot these shots too close, because then the foreground subject starts to cover up the background too much. And I usually don't want to go too wide on these shots, because the further back I go, the less bokeh there is in the shot, the less out of focus the background is. So you lose some of the effect of that f1.8 lens. And just one more little thing that you can do here that makes the shot look really cool. You can move your subject lower in the frame if you want the audience to notice the background more. And here I'm locking off my focus, so it's in manual focus. That way, even if I completely remove her from the shot, it doesn't shift the focus. So now she's only occupying the bottom of the shot. So then I might add a little bit of handheld slider movement, real slow, and that creates parallax. And parallax is when the foreground and the background are moving independently of each other. The more 3D you can make your shots look, the more cinematic they are. Now I'm going to explain a little bit about my gimbal settings. For the most part, I only want to be panning. I don't want to be tilting. I don't want to be like tilting up like that too much. I don't want to be like tilting down like that, unless it's for a specific reason. If I'm just shooting general coverage, I kind of want to be right at her eye level, like this. So I go to her eye level, I switch over, now I'm in follow yaw only mode, and I'm also going to reset my position. That's 2 taps on my gimbal. Now that makes sure the gimbal is looking straight forward. Now, let's find some good lighting for Kobe. We're about to lose the sun in a couple minutes, so I'm going to have to hurry here. So Kobe, I want you in the cross light. So that means I want the light to the side. So will you stand right there in the light? Now Kobe has sunlight on her face, and there's dark and light patches behind her. This looks super cinematic because there's so much depth in the shot. I'll show you the wrong way to do this. Go in the shadow until you don't see the sun. Okay. Much less cinematic right here. Even less cinematic if I frame her like this, so you can't even see much of her environment, or like this. We're going to start back about here, and what you're going to do is you're going to walk kind of fast, like you're excited to look out there. And you're just going to walk up to the railing and then look out at the city. 3, 2, 1, go. My autofocus settings were a little bit off. I had it set to responsive, so it responded a little bit too fast when it went behind that column. So now it's in standard responsiveness, which means that it won't change focus too quickly. 3, 2, 1, lock. So now I'm getting that shot that I talked about before where we see the view from behind the person, behind the main subject, so we can sort of imagine ourselves in their place as they're looking out there. Not loving that boots sign, so let's face you toward that house, looking straight toward the sun actually. I'm gonna lower my exposure a bit. So my gimbal is now in full lock mode. It doesn't follow my pan or my tilt. So now I can just sort of push in, just like that. I'll pull back. Like that. So now I'm going to demonstrate how I would follow Kobe as she walks. So I'm in aperture priority mode on my camera, which keeps the aperture constant. And I'm just going to let the shutter fluctuate as she walks around. And the camera's going to automatically adjust the shutter to keep the exposure proper as she walks from this brighter area to a darker area. Walk. Okay, so I'm tracking with her to the side here. And then I'm going to make an L move as she walks down this hallway. And I'm following her from here on out. I'm keeping her to sort of a head and shoulders. Now I'm going to do the same thing where I lead in front of her, which gives me another shot that I can cut to. So we've got her face centered at roughly the same distance as before. I'm going to walk straight ahead. She's going to walk toward me. And actually, I'm going to lock off my gimbal. There we go, full lock mode. That way my gimbal's not going to pan accidentally, because I know she's just going to make a straight beeline toward me. She's just going to walk straight toward me, so there's no need for me to pan. So she's going to walk toward me, I'm going to walk forward, and I'm going to occasionally glance at the monitor here to make sure she's framed properly. And ideally, the hallway will be receding directly behind her head. In other words, the vanishing point of the hallway, the point where the hallway reaches the end, will stay behind her head to keep the composition more symmetrical. Let's walk. So I'm counting her steps. Step, 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 step. So that when she walks, I walk. When she takes a step, I take a step. That way she stays the same distance from me. So she's going to walk down the hallway, and I'm going to walk keeping her in a side view, and we're going to let some obstructions pass in front of us. We're going to let some columns and walls pass in front of us to create depth in the shot. Having foreground objects come between the subject and the camera is cinematic. The more planes you have in your scene, in other words, the more objects at different distances from the camera, the more 3D the shot will look. First, I'm going to sort of set my exposure and lock that off because I don't want that fluctuating this time. We're going to pass a lot of windows and I don't want it getting unpredictable. So I like it around here. Second, I'm going to have Kobe step in. Kobe, can you step in, please? Here we go. I'm letting the face detect her face. Okay. I'm going to keep her, actually maybe a little longer. Yeah, right there. Maybe this is called a cowboy, where you can just about see her knees. Look at me real quick. Okay, face detect is locked onto her face. I'm switching over to manual focus. Now I know she's 100% in focus. And as long as the distance between her and the gimbal doesn't change, she will stay in focus. Now I'm going to switch over to full lock mode. So the gimbal is not following my pan or my tilt. Okay, Kobe, you're going to take 3 steps back. 1, 2, 3. Stop there. Walk. And as she walks, I'm going to try to keep a little more lead room in front of her. In other words, keep her on the right side of the frame just a little bit, not quite centered, because this just looks more natural to the audience's eye. And let her go away. Final shot I'm going to show you here is how to orbit around your subject with the 35 lens, because this looks especially beautiful because of the nice out-of-focus background that you get. An orbit is where the gimbal is rotating around the subject, keeping the subject in the center of the shot. One thing you have to keep in mind as you're doing the orbit is the subject has to have enough room around them on all sides for the gimbal to stay the same distance the whole time. Kobe can't be by the window. Even though it looks beautiful, there's no space for the gimbal if she's that close to the window. I have to bring her out here, let's say right here, and then I get my framing the way I want it. That's good. I'm gonna lock off my focus here because I'm gonna try to keep the same distance from her the entire time. And I'm also going to make sure I'm in pan follow only mode. We're only following the pan. And then I'm going to have Kobe look out there at the light, just because usually it's most flattering to your subject if they are looking into the light source. And I'm going to do one more little thing to make this easier on myself. I'm going to close the aperture a tiny bit. We're going to f2.8. It was at f1.8, now we're at f2.8. This gives me just a little bit more depth of field. And as I walk, I'm going to be looking at my feet and her feet, because I want to make sure that I'm staying roughly the same distance from her as I walk. Action. It gives a different mood if you go slow. If you go fast, it starts to feel a little crazy, disorienting, might make your audience vomit a little bit. And you'll notice as I'm walking, my shoulders are not going up or down at all. I'm trying to keep my shoulders perfectly level so that it doesn't look like this. This is what happens if you let your shoulders bob. You get a bouncing effect, which really sucks. That's our show for you today about the 35mm lens and why I think it's so cinematic. I hope that you found this informative. Hope it inspired you to make more cinematic shots in your movies. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.